The first time I met Evelyn Harper, she was standing alone in the middle of a hardware store parking lot, staring at a broken bag of cement like it had personally betrayed her. Rain dripped from the edge of her gray scarf. Cars passed without slowing down. Nobody offered to help, and I don't know why, but something about the way she stood that reminded me of my mother during her final years. Proud, exhausted, invisible. I should have kept walking. If I had, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe I wouldn't still hear her voice in my head every night, whispering those strange words. After your son-in-law leaves, don't sweep the shed. At the time, I thought she was confused. Now I know she was trying to warn me. It started 3 years ago, just after my wife passed away. Losing Claire hollowed the house out. People talk about grief like it's sadness, but it isn't. Sadness has movement. Grief is stillness. It sits beside you at dinner, sleeps in your bed, watches television with you in silence. For months, I barely left the house except to work. My daughter Emily tried her best to keep me grounded. She called every evening, usually while cooking dinner with her husband Daniel. I'd hear pans clinking in the background, while she asked if I'd eaten anything besides toast. Daniel always sounded polite enough. Too polite, maybe. You should let us come by more often, Frank, he'd say. No one should be alone this much. I appreciated it. At least I thought I did. Emily had married him 2 years earlier. Clean cut, calm voice, worked in property management, the kind of man who always knew the right thing to say at the exact right moment. Still, there was something about him I could never fully settle into. Nothing obvious, just little things. The way his smile disappeared the second someone looked away. The way he asked questions without ever answering any himself. The way he studied people when they spoke, like he was calculating something beneath their words. Claire used to notice it too. He's charming, she once whispered to me after a family dinner. But he watches everything. At the time, I laughed it off. After she died, Daniel became even more attentive. He fixed things around my house without being asked, offered to help with paperwork, checked my medications after my surgery. Emily adored him for it. He treats you like his own father, she told me once. I wanted to believe that. Then came Evelyn. I saw her again a week after the parking lot incident. Same hardware store, same lonely expression. This time, she was arguing quietly with the cashier over the cost of lumber. I only need 2 boards, she kept saying softly. I measured carefully. The cashier looked exhausted, impatient. I stepped forward before I really thought about it. I'll cover it, I said. Evelyn turned toward me slowly, suspicious at first. Her pale blue eyes looked watery with age, but sharp underneath. No, she said immediately. I don't take charity. It's not charity, I replied. Call it repayment for letting me carry your cement last week. That earned the smallest smile. After a long pause, she nodded once. Outside, while loading the lumber into her rusted pickup truck, I noticed how badly her hands trembled. You building something? I asked. Repairing a shed. You live nearby? Close enough. She hesitated before adding, Most people avoid my property. I almost asked why, but something in her expression stopped me. Instead, I helped tie down the wood. Before leaving, she looked at me carefully. You're grieving, she said. The words hit me harder than I expected. How could you tell? Because you walk like someone carrying a ghost. I stood there speechless while she climbed into the truck. Then she drove away. After that, we somehow fell into a routine. Every Thursday, I'd run into her at the hardware store or nearby diner, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. She never shared much about herself. No husband, no children. Just an old farmhouse at the edge of town and a collection of strange observations that somehow always lingered in my mind afterward. You trust too easily when you're lonely, she told me once over coffee. Another time she said, people reveal themselves in the things they pretend not to notice. I began looking forward to our conversations more than I should have. Emily found it sweet. She sounds eccentric, she laughed during one dinner at my house. Maybe she adopted you. Daniel barely reacted when I mentioned Evelyn's name, but I noticed something strange. For just a second, his fork stopped moving. You said she lives near Blackwater Road? He asked casually. Yeah, why? Just curious. He smiled after saying it, but his eyes stayed cold. A few days later, Emily called me upset. Apparently, Daniel didn't want her visiting Evelyn's property if she ever accompanied me there. He says old rural homes can be dangerous, Emily explained. Weak floors and stuff. Maybe that should have sounded reasonable. Instead, it felt rehearsed. The following week, Evelyn finally invited me to her farmhouse. The place looked forgotten by time. Tall weeds swallowed the fence line. Paint peeled from the porch railings. Wind chimes creaked softly despite the still air. But the shed behind the house looked newer than everything else. Recently repaired. "You did all this yourself?" I asked. "Had to." Inside the house smelled like cedar and dust. Old photographs lined the walls, though many had been turned face down. I noticed that immediately. "You don't like pictures?" "I don't like remembering people incorrectly." There was heaviness in the way she said it. We drank tea in silence for a while before she suddenly asked, "Your daughter trusts her husband completely, doesn't she?" I frowned. "Of course." Evelyn nodded slowly, staring into her cup. "That's usually how it begins." A chill crept through me. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked strange questions. Did Daniel ever borrow money? Did he avoid discussing his childhood? Did he ever enter rooms quietly enough to startle people? Each question tightened something inside me, because the answer was yes, to all of them. I told myself it was coincidence. Old people notice patterns where none exist. Still, that night I barely slept. And over the next few weeks, I started seeing things differently. Daniel became harder to read once I was looking carefully. Sometimes I'd catch him standing silently in my kitchen, almost as if he'd been listening before entering the room. Other times, he'd ask oddly specific questions about my savings, my property taxes, my will, always casually, always smiling. Then came the afternoon everything changed. I arrived at Evelyn's farmhouse unannounced after work. Her truck was there, but the front door stood slightly open. I called her name twice. No answer. The house felt unnaturally quiet. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, pale and breathing hard, one trembling hand clutching the edge of the chair. "Evelyn?" Her eyes lifted toward me, terrified. Not confused. Terrified. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "He knows you've been coming here," she whispered. "Who?" But deep down I already knew. Her fingers tightened painfully. Then she leaned closer and said the words that still wake me in the middle of the night. "After your son-in-law leaves, don't sweep the shed." And before I could ask what she meant, headlights appeared outside the window. Daniel's car slowly rolled into the driveway. Daniel stepped out of the car with the same calm smile he always wore. But standing in Evelyn's kitchen, with her fingers still trembling around my wrist, that smile suddenly felt wrong, too measured, too prepared. The screen door creaked as he walked up the porch steps. Evelyn released me immediately and leaned back in her chair, forcing her expression blank. I could actually see the effort it took. Daniel entered carrying a paper grocery bag. "There you are," he said warmly. "Emily said you weren't answering your phone." His eyes moved from me to Evelyn. For a fraction of a second, the room changed. No smile. No warmth. Just recognition. Then it vanished. "I didn't realize you two knew each other," he added casually. Neither of us answered fast enough. That silence told him everything. He set the grocery bag on the counter with slow, careful movements. "Well," he said lightly, "small world." I tried to steady myself. "What are you doing here?" "Helping out." He glanced toward Evelyn. "Aren't I?" She looked away instead of answering. That frightened me more than anything so far. Daniel turned toward me again. "You okay, Frank?" "You look pale." "I'm fine." But I wasn't. Because suddenly dozens of tiny moments from the past few years were rearranging themselves. Inside my head like shattered glass forming a picture. The questions about my property. The quiet way he entered rooms. The forced concern. The constant need to stay involved in everything. And Evelyn's fear. Daniel reached into the grocery bag and began. Putting away canned food like this was completely normal. "You should have told me you were visiting Evelyn," he said. Something about the way he said her name made my stomach tighten. "Not friendly. Familiar? How do you know her?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Long story." Evelyn finally spoke. "Daniel." Her voice cracked. He stopped moving immediately. The silence afterward felt unbearable. Then he sighed softly, almost tired. "You should rest," he told her gently. The words sounded caring, but underneath them was something else. A warning. I looked at Evelyn, waiting for her to say something, anything, but she stayed frozen in her chair. Daniel turned to me. Can I talk to you outside for a second? Every instinct told me not to go, but refusing would only make things worse. So I followed him onto the porch. The evening air felt cold against my skin. For several seconds, he simply stared out at the weeds surrounding the property. Then he said quietly, "She's been confusing you." "I don't think so." "She does this sometimes." I crossed my arms. "Does what?" "Makes people suspicious." His tone remained calm, but I noticed something strange. He never looked directly at me while speaking. "She's lonely," he continued. "And she gets attached to people. Attached enough to be terrified when you walked in?" That finally made him look at me. His smile disappeared. "I think grief has made you vulnerable, Frank." The way he said it sent a cold wave through my chest. Not because it was cruel, because it sounded practiced, like he'd been preparing that sentence for a long time. "You've been isolating yourself since Claire died," he said softly. "Emily worries about you constantly." There it was again. Emily? He always used her like a shield. Every concern wrapped inside concern for her. Every uncomfortable question redirected toward protecting her feelings. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. I had never once confronted him directly about anything. Not really. Because he always made it feel unreasonable. Inside the house, I heard something fall. Daniel turned instantly toward the sound. Too instantly. He stepped back inside before I could follow. By the time I entered the kitchen, Evelyn was standing beside the table, breathing hard. A broken teacup lay shattered across the floor. Daniel gently took her arm. "Careful," he murmured. She jerked away from him. Fear flashed openly across her face now. Real fear. Not confusion, not age. Fear. I stepped forward immediately. "Don't touch her." Daniel slowly raised both hands. "Frank, no, I want answers." The room went silent again. Wind rattled softly against the windows. Evelyn looked at me with exhausted eyes. Then finally she spoke. "He used to come here years ago." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, like a man realizing a secret could no longer be contained. "He told me he was helping her," I said carefully. "You believed that?" Evelyn whispered. I looked between them. My heartbeat was becoming painful now. Daniel spoke before she could continue. "My mother worked for Evelyn." The statement caught me completely off guard. "She cleaned this house when I was young," he said quietly. "After my father left." Evelyn lowered herself slowly into the chair again. "She was a good woman," she whispered. Daniel nodded once. For the first time since arriving, he actually looked human again. Tired, older somehow. "My mother trusted people too easily," he said. "That ruined her." I frowned. "What does that have to do with any of this?" Neither answered immediately. Then Evelyn looked directly at me. "His mother died in that shed." The air left my lungs. Daniel stared at the floor. "She slipped during a storm," Evelyn continued shakily. "Hit her head." "That's enough," Daniel said quietly. But Evelyn kept going. "I found her too late." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She was alone because I sent her out there to move equipment before the rain." Guilt flooded her voice so deeply it felt ancient. I've lived with that every day since. Suddenly pieces began connecting. The shed, the repairs, the strange tension between them. I looked at Daniel carefully. "You blame her." He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Wouldn't you?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "He came back years later," she said. "After he married your daughter." My chest tightened instantly. "What?" Daniel finally looked directly at me. "She contacted me first," he said, calmly. "She wanted to apologize." Evelyn shook her head weakly. "Not like this." "She was sick," Daniel continued. "Alone, afraid," he paused. "So I helped her." "But why hide it?" I asked. Neither answered. Then I remembered the photographs turned face down. The silence. The fear. And suddenly the truth appeared. Not all at once, but slowly enough to hurt. Evelyn wasn't afraid Daniel would hurt her. She was afraid of what he wanted from her. Forgiveness. For years, he had stayed close to the woman he blamed for his mother's death. Not to destroy her. To force meaning onto his pain. To hear her say it wasn't his fault for surviving. To hear someone explain why his mother died while everyone else kept living. And maybe he hated himself for needing that. "I never meant for Emily to get involved," Evelyn whispered to me. But when I learned who her husband was, she broke off crying quietly. Daniel looked exhausted now, like a man carrying something unbearably heavy. I didn't marry Emily because of Evelyn, he said firmly. I searched his face for dishonesty, for manipulation, but for the first time since knowing him, I saw raw grief instead. She saved me, he admitted softly. Your daughter did. The anger inside me faltered. Evelyn wiped her eyes slowly. Then she looked toward me one final time. You still need to check the shed. The room froze. Daniel stared at her sharply. Evelyn! But she continued. There's something in there your wife left before she died. Every hair on my arms stood up. What are you talking about? Evelyn looked stunned suddenly, as though realizing she'd said too much. Daniel stepped toward me slowly. Frank, my wife? I whispered. He swallowed hard. And that was the moment I understood. Whatever waited inside that shed, Claire had known about it before she died, and both of them had been keeping it from me.